Everybody, we're here today for a special meeting of People Scrutiny to look at the budget and how it affects the people of Monmouthshire. We will later on, shortly, be having a group of students from Chepstow School sitting in the gallery behind to get a taste of local democracy. Okay? We'd like to look at the draft, the budget today, and I'm going to hand over to Peter Davis. If that's okay, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I was working on the basis that Rachel, as Cabinet Member, would come in initially, if that's okay with you, Chair.
It's fine with me.
Thank you both. So I have a presentation for you. If you wouldn't mind, I will share that now. Let me just give you a moment. Can you all see the presentation in the chamber and online? I'm getting nods from the online dial-ins, and I can see that you can see it in the chamber from the background screens as well. Can you all hear me okay? Brilliant. Okay, so I'm presenting to you the 2023-2024 draft budget proposals. So, to appreciate where we are in the budget, we need to talk about context. It's been an unprecedented year. And when I say unprecedented, I mean we have seen interest rates rise at a level and a rate that we haven't seen since the 1970s. In year, this meant that the previous budget that was adopted by the previous administration got to month 4 before hitting, I think, nearly £9 million of shortfall, and then went to over 9 million of shortfall by month 6 of this year. So the speed at which inflation and pressures on the council have been unprecedented in the history of Monmouthshire County Council. We need to add this to the background that councils themselves have been underfunded for 12 years under austerity. We've been, as a council, had to consider how we cut our cloth for over 12 years and work on often below inflation increases. In terms of inflation, that's been influenced by a lot of issues. So Brexit has caused inflation. Hello, I'm sorry I lost my connection. I believe I'm back now. So the pandemic has put on specific pressures in the terms of the context of the council. We have additional pressures for service use, particularly in the areas of care and where funding has been provided by the governments for the pandemic for councils. That has now dried up. Gas prices that I think should be energy prices. The energy prices were originally spiraled up through price setting through OPEC on oil prices. That was OPEC plus, and then increased with gas prices through the war in Ukraine. And then we're dealing with a spiraling job market where wages are spiraling upwards to meet costs of living crisis, and that's particularly true for some of our colleagues, particularly in the caring area. So what that actually means for Monmouthshire is, again, we're using the word unprecedented, and it is unprecedented. We're facing cost pressures of 26 million over 23 to 24. You'll see through newspapers and the news that councils across the country are announcing similar, or in many cases larger, shortfalls. So what do these cost pressures actually consist of? Let's break it down at a high level. The cost that it will take to deliver the services that we deliver in 2022 will be an additional £11.9 million. As a council, we also need to find an additional £4.5 million to cover the huge rate of increase in energy costs. Our pay awards, some of which will affect the hangovers from the 22 pay awards where issues haven't been settled for teaching staff and need to cover inflation for next year, are estimated to be at 7 million. We also have other things such as treasury costs raising to 3.2 million and the raising by 5.2 million and an additional 421,000 pounds associated with the fire authority level, which is currently proposed, and that's at 8.63%. So what does that mean in terms of the council? This is where we spend our money. You'll see at the back here, I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen, 32% of our money is spent on children and young people. So that's principally the schools and education budget with additional services for children and young people. That amounts to £59 million. In terms of social care and health, that's where we spend another 31% of our budget, and that's 58.4 million. A lot of that is associated with care for children and adults. So you can already see we've got we've got nearly 120 million pounds, and 63% of our outlay is in children and young people and social care and health. 13% of our budget, that's 24.1 million, is on the communities in place, and those are more of the services that you see on a day-to-day basis as a resident. We then have a tranche of other smaller outlays, and again, these are all over £1 million. We spend £7.4 million on our council tax reduction scheme, which means we're supporting the most vulnerable in our community who are on low incomes as families and cannot afford to pay council tax. Borrowing costs against our capital programme of £7.1 million. Mon Life that provides our leisure centres and our cultural heritage buildings and support is at 4.9 million. Democracy, Planning and People is at 4.8 million. Policy, Scrutiny and Customer Service is at 3.2 million. And our corporate management and insurance, mostly corporate fees, is at 1.3 million. Sorry, did anybody want to gaze a bit more at that before I moved on? My fingers slipped. Okay, I'm not hearing any. So I mentioned that we had £11.9 million of service pressures. To give you a breakdown of that, sorry, there's a bullet missing there. These are where the main parts of these pressures come from. So in children's social care, we have a 4.4 million additional pressure. Bear in mind, we already spend over 50 million on social care, on children's care. So on social care, sorry. This is a really volatile area. We struggle with having enough placements for children, and what we're seeing is increasing demand and complexity of demand as well. Some complex cases can bring in a really, really high cost demand very, very quickly for the council. We're also seeing inflationary pressures in the costs of providing those care, and importantly, we're seeing staff shortages where it's difficult to recruit people. In terms of adult social care, we have a 1.8 million increase in pressure. That's driven by two things. One, we have an aging population, and in Monmouthshire, we have a particularly aging demographic. I think our median age is 47 years old. We also have an increase in post-pandemic demand for social care, where people have experienced or suffered from COVID and need additional care going forwards. We've got real living wage implications. We're a real living wage council, and the cost of keeping up with the real living wage in a heavily inflated environment is estimated to be at £1 million in this point. And this gives a response to the challenge of what is a fragile market, where we've struggled to recruit and retain carers. A lot of our caring workforce comes from over our county boundaries, and as costs have increased in terms of actual cost of living and particularly travel, it's becoming more and more difficult to recruit people and retain people who are looking to work closer to home and looking for potentially career changes that would allow them to bring in more income. During the pandemic, Welsh Government put in place legislation to address high levels of homelessness and to ensure that councils across Wales provided support for individuals and families who became homelessness at a level which is appropriate for modern Wales. This is the effect of increasing the number of people and families that we place in temporary accommodation in line with the national policy. That comes to 1.9 million in the next year. We're also seeing increases in the need for support for pupils and children with additional learning needs, and increases in placement cost for children with additional learning needs. We're seeing learning needs being identified over a wider age range of children as well. And we estimate that the increase in support of additional learning needs will be at about £600,000. In terms of recycling and waste costs, we're seeing £200,000 increase. That's principally driven by increases in costs in haulage, again linked to fuel costs, and also in treatment and disposal cost increases. We're also seeing our own carried waste income fall slightly. Our passenger transport fleet will cost another £612,000 to run in the next year. That's driven by an increase in home to school transport operator costs, and again, inflation and fuel costs are driving that, in addition to increased pupil numbers that we're seeing come through. In terms of income shortfalls, and that's across our leisure, our outdoor education, our civil parking enforcement and investment property income, we're seeing a shortfall of about £800,000 there. That's in some ways driven by previous estimates in last year's budget, all things such as civil parking enforcement and outdoor education, leisure centre membership, which were not targets that were attainable. We're also seeing below anticipated returns in our property investment income. In terms of our community safety, we have additional local capacity as the size of our population and community in Monmouthshire grows, and that we anticipate will cost £84,000 to support. So, as I said earlier, the cost of delivering our existing services increases next year by 26.6 million, or 14%. So our income obviously does increase next year. We were very happy to receive an above anticipated grant from Welsh Government. It did stand at 3.5%. Welsh Government was able to transfer increases for areas such as care, announced in the autumn statement, through to councils. So we've received that. We've also factored in increases in council tax and increases in charges where we will be asking residents to pay a fair price for the discretionary services that we provide. That income will generate £15.7 million, or 7.5%. So we still have 6.5% left to cover. You'll see some of the councils in Wales announcing that they are using their reserves to cover their costs. So bigger councils, Rhondda and Test, Caerphilly County Borough, are able to use their reserves. They do have significantly, and I mean significantly larger reserves than us. We have the third lowest reserves in Wales. The shortfall in the budget we were working with this year meant that we had to use reserves as a contingency, and we're therefore unable to consider going to reserves as a strategy. We are holding reserves back specifically as part of the budget to cover risks and the realisation of risks, but the utilisation of reserves at this point when we have hit the rainy day is unfortunately not an option due to the low level of reserves that we do have. So that balance of 7.5% or 11.4 million needs to be brought about by service changes. So we're going to talk about that. So our approach in putting together this budget has been policy and priority led, and that is putting people first and looking at the ways to maintain our quality of service and look to improve services now and in the future. When we say now and in the future, we appreciate that this year is the bumper year in terms of sorry, I keep getting distracted with the chat notifications coming through. So this year is anticipated to be the bumper year in terms of shortfall. We're now looking at forecasts and expecting that inflation will slow and start to drop through 2023. It's not going to drop like a stone as we would like it to do, but what it's not going to do is continue to escalate to a point that we will be placed in this unprecedented position again. And again, we've had talks in council about how the budget has been balanced over the previous years through austerity. We have not seen a 26 million shortfall in the history of Monmouthshire County Council. This is unprecedented. So service changes now will be limited, and in the future we will look to build. We also need to meet that challenge head on. So we've been through a very extensive process on the draft budget proposals for you today. Those have been risk assessed, those impacts and mitigations were understood. Cabinet members that are here joining us today will admit that they had the very unpleasant experience of sitting around several tables with me for many, many, many days as we went through every single proposal for the budget, made sure that the ones that we felt were not appropriate for Monmouthshire and were not tolerable were pushed back, and that we have only accepted those which we feel that Monmouthshire can tolerate. And again, that is in the context of £11.4 million of savings. So at that point, we do have to accept that there are changes in this that we would not wish to make as a council, but we have to consider in terms of closing that cost gap. So what does 11.4 million of savings proposals look like in this budget? High-level summary to start. Children and young people, at 52% of our budget. We're proposing a 5% net increase in our school budgets in the next year. That does, unfortunately, still leave a gap in what we anticipate it does cost to run children and young people, and we therefore need to make a 2.8% efficiency saving to close that gap. To do that, we're expecting schools to use reserves to see through this year. And again, it's important to remember that 2.8% efficiency saving would be made after we as a council have made full provision for energy increases for schools and for pay increases. In the previous budget, excess pay increases over a certain level, which we are seeing, has been pushed into the school budgets themselves. Unfortunately, we do still need to make savings within children and young people to close that grant, so there are some additional areas. I think we were the last Gwent council to provide a full subsidy to the Gwent Music Service. We've therefore recommending a reduced contribution, which means we withdraw the majority of subsidy from the service, but maintain a hardship fund to support pupils from low-income families, because music is a full part of our cultural heritage in Wales, and it is important that every child has an opportunity to take up music. This may result in some reduced class-based provision through Gwent Music Service, and parents will be asked to cover charges to continue lessons unless they qualify for the hardship fund. We provide and will continue to provide free breakfasts for every child in the county that wants one or needs one. We also provide subsidised childcare for children through school breakfast clubs. At the moment, that is at £1 per session. For contrast, I think it's around £6.95 that I pay for my children to go to an after-school session, which gives you the same amount of wraparound childcare. We're going to be asking parents to pay £2 per session, so they will continue to have heavily subsidised childcare on school breakfast clubs, which provides wraparound care, which will provide families subsidised care in a wraparound manner to allow working parents to go to work. We're also going to be following a rigorous grant funding strategy to offset what will be reduced staffing levels for the school psychology service and the support service for children with additional learning needs. Moving on, our next biggest area of outlay is our social care budget, which we will be increasing by 7% next year. And again, that does have a gap that will need to be covered. So we will be putting investment in changing the way services are provided, and that will be alongside proposed savings of £2 million in adult social care. And that's going to come through reviewing the direct care for some of our clients and looking to rebalance in-house and external provision. We're looking to introduce a falls prevention and early intervention service in order to reduce the number of people being placed in nursing and residential care directly from home or hospital. We will also be increasing children's services by 3.4 million, and I previously mentioned that this is a very volatile area which can accumulate some very high costs very quickly for the council. And again, we still need to make changes. So we'll be re-evaluating processes and decisions around our high cost placements and looking to carry out a review of family time service development and looking to review wider structures and service operating costs. We're also looking to make a saving of £300,000 by remodelling our learning disability and mental health teams, and that will focus on a decrease in the team management hours. In terms of Mon Life, we will be increasing the budget by 22%. So what we are doing is ensuring that we keep our cultural and leisure services open. Our swimming pools, our leisure centres will remain open. You'll see some councils looking at closing and keeping closed swimming pools because they are a very high cost asset for a council to operate. We genuinely believe that it is very, very important to keep leisure centres open. Personally, I would still be speaking to you from a wheelchair today if I hadn't had access to a swimming pool to rehabilitate several years ago. It's incredibly important for our communities and our healthy communities to keep these open. But we do need to make £600,000 of savings. And that will give some impact on staffing levels and opening hours. Where opening hours change, we are carrying out a review of the usage of our leisure services and looking to change those opening hours in quiet times where the services are used less. We'll also be doing things such as expanding our Nature Isn't Neat program, which means a reduction in our mowing schedule. And that will reduce our costs, and it will have the knock-on effect of increasing biodiversity for the area. We're also looking to gain savings of £1.3 million through further decarbonisation. So we're looking at about £714,000 through reducing energy consumption across the council estate. We're also looking at reducing our running costs by lowering energy consumption and mileage on our fleet maintenance. That will be to the tune of about £160,000. And that will be by reducing our operating fleet itself and the mileage taken. In terms of landlord services, we're looking to do a one-off reduction in corporate building maintenance and revenue budget to the tune of about £665,000. That means that we will be doing less maintenance on our properties in this year and only doing essential needed maintenance. We're also looking to rationalise our property estate and increase the income from our solar farm export tariff. We're also looking at fees and charges, and I mentioned earlier that we'd be asking residents to pay a fair price for services, discretionary services that we provide. That should bring in an additional income of 1.4 million, and that's seen across a range of increases in discretionary fees and charges across our services. Like our leisure centres, we value our community hubs and libraries. We are seeing libraries being proposed for close in other councils. That is not something that we feel is appropriate for our county. We are looking to keep our community hubs open. However, as with leisure centres, we are having to review the hours that can be opened and looking to close in quiet times. We're also looking at a 1-year reduction in budget for library books of 50%. That's £45,000, and we'll be using that to mitigate the impact on staffing and services in those areas. We've had a lovely member of the public came to one of our consultation events in Caldercots this week and asked if we could have a public book drive with donations from the public. And I think that's something we're very much going to encourage. We're looking to reduce our contact staffing levels by 2.5 full-time employees. That will mean that phones do get answered more slowly. We will maintain e-contact in terms of operating the My Monmouthshire app and the web access to the same, but there will be less people operating our council's call centre. That still leaves a gap. So you will have heard that Monmouthshire does have one of the lower settlements from Welsh Government. Over the last 2 years, we've had 2 of the highest increases across Wales. The reason that we do get a relatively low settlement of grant from Welsh Government is due to the population and the residential demographic of Monmouthshire. The calculations used anticipate that we are able to raise more money through council tax than most councils, and there is an expectation from government that that would be a facility that is used. However, we completely understand that residents are bearing the brunt of the cost of living crisis just as the council is, and are reluctant to ask for a significant increase that we've seen in some council areas. We're therefore proposing a well below inflation increase of 5.95%. We will include rigorous support, help and support for low income households, and I thank everybody on the committee here today who voted through the council tax reduction scheme that I put to council on Thursday, which will provide much needed support to low income families and include host families for people who have come across from the Ukraine and Ukrainian families themselves. That 5.95% will provide much needed funds for service delivery, which I think I've given you a flavour of today, is a dire need to ensure that we keep providing services for the council. So what does that look like for our residents? The most common house category across any council in the UK is Band D, and that's normally used to give you an idea of where we are. That change equates to £1.69 per week in a Band D household, or £7.32 increase per month. And that would be over 12 months, as you are now able to pay your council tax over 12 months rather than 10 months as previous arrangements were. That totals to £87.87 per year for that Band D house. So let's talk about risk. I've already mentioned that we had over £9 million of risk appear within 4 months on the 2022 budget. And again, I talked in terms of the level of inflation, the speed of inflation and pressure that built up on the council in that year. We do not anticipate that risks will realise at the rates that they realised this year. We're therefore looking at £3 million of reserves to cover risks. And when we talk about risks, we talk about how much we can deliver the saving proposals and realise those. And also understanding that the cost pressures that we've put into our midterm financial planning, which I'm talking to you today about, those are based on best estimates. We can't say exactly how the economy and pressure on council services will go over the next year, but we do have many, many years experience of modelling it and generally forecasting it within a ballpark. 2022 has been a lesson in how that can be wrong. We also have uncertainty, particularly around areas such as pay awards, which can have quite a big impact on council funds. We also have some areas which we can't get clarity on for today and for the proposals of the budget, and those principally around specific grant funding that would be available through Welsh Government for projects, again, and other. And again, we are hoping and believe that we can have a clear idea of where it's likely to be, but until it's announced and confirmed through Welsh Government, those are not certainties. There's also costs around redundancy and pension costs, and that all comes down to not being able to identify what our redundancy costs are until we have agreed redundancies with individuals affected, because it's a very personal item which is based on the individual's length of service and their personal income. In short, we have £3 million of reserves set aside, which would be used to cover the realisation of risks for this year. Sorry, I think I missed one there. I did. It's about our capital programme. So our capital programme is responsible for overseeing maintenance and enhancements of our council estates, and it its asset base. So that's our school buildings, our council offices, our community hubs, our leisure hunts centres, our country farms, our highways, and our road infrastructure. So essentially, these budget proposals continue to support the priorities of the councils and to continue the investment in this area. We're looking to align with our priorities, which are in our draft strategic plan, and we're looking to tackle the longer term challenges that communities are facing. The capital programme itself has two very, very big players in terms of where money is going. And those two players are the new Abergavenny 3 to 19 school build and the new care home in Crickheat Road, which this year. This slide is just to give you an idea of what we're doing. Obviously, we're sat here in the scrutiny meetings, and you're very familiar with that. We're also committed to communicating and consulting with the public. We're holding face-to-face virtual engagements across all populations and areas and towns in the county. We're also doing some targeted ones as well for, if we have the pupils in the gallery, we're doing one specifically for the Youth Council of Monmouthshire, for instance. We're also doing some online consultations, which would allow people to join without leaving their homes. Online, we have the specific budget page from the council website where every resident can go and read through our proposals, and they can answer our online survey. And you'll be seeing a social media campaign encouraging people to engage. This is my second scrutiny meeting of the week. I have one again on Tuesday, and we'll be going through those. We'll look into a final budget landing in Cabinet on the 1st of March. After that, we'll move to full council, where we take the budget proposals and the council tax setting, and that is set for the 2nd of March. Chair, at this point, I'll hand back to you.
Councillor Edwards, would you like to ask your first question? Or your question?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Garrick, for your presentation this morning. It's very much appreciated. I've got about 5 questions, but I'll just ask a few for now and let my colleagues have some input. Taking a look at how this budget may affect children and young people, you mentioned that the capital programme oversees maintenance and enhancement of our roads, schools and leisure centres, etc. So with the 3% efficiency saving proposal, would you expect that across the board? As you'll be well aware, some schools are new or have undergone major improvements in recent years. Also, most schools were in sound financial position during the pandemic, thanks to the extra money allocated during that time. However, a few schools, and particularly Chepstow School, were unfortunately in deficit due to historic reasons. My main concern is the continuation of improvement of the school environment that needs improvement so that children can keep up with their peers in other parts of Monmouthshire, particularly while they patiently wait for funding under the Sustainable Communities for Learning programme, formerly known as 21st Century Schools. So, as you'll be well aware, Chepstow is the final school to hopefully greatly benefit from this programme, the final piece in the Monmouthshire jigsaw, if you like. And although the Cabinet Member for Education confirmed before Christmas that the school and its staff are content with the progress of work improvements there, as the only school remaining to benefit in this programme, I just wanted some reassurance. I wanted to ensure that this continued improvement hasn't changed with this proposed budget for Chepstow, or other schools for that matter that need this level of investment, or even in the budgeted preparation work for any future funding under the Sustainable Communities for Learning programme. That's my first thought and question. My second is that, going back to your presentation, Regarding bringing in additional income with discretionary fees and charges, such as increased car parking and waste services, surely this will actually put people off from using the car park, unless, of course, that is perhaps intentional to get people walking, but will likely mean not producing the income expected. And probably, to be fair, definitely in Chepstow and other parts, especially in the towns, will annoy residents in the actual process of it all. So also, by charging more for waste services, this will likely see more fly tipping or the burning of waste in gardens. This in turn will lead to more issues for the council staff to deal with. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on that brief assessment. And finally, in the presentation, I have some concern on the reduction to opening hours of hubs and the contact centre, which, as you mentioned, has been reduced by 2.5 members of staff, and changes impacting on the speed to respond. These are the types of resources that people will tend to need more of in these difficult times that we live in. Has this been taken into consideration when weighing up your options? Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the hubs and the contact centres, we've not got an intention to change the hours of the contact centre. It's the hubs that we're looking to change the hours of. And yes, we absolutely have taken into account the need for people to use hubs, particularly in these harder times. And that is why we have done everything in our power to ensure that all hubs remain open. In terms of the changes in availability of the contact centre, it's our anticipation that it's going to take a little longer and high volume periods to answer the phone. It will still be there and it will still be available. And we still also have the alternative prospect of My Monmouthshire for people to access, as well as being able to email people like ourselves. In the case of fly tipping and waste, we are aware of those issues as well, and that is why, unlike other councils, we are not changing our frequency of routine curbside collections. We are continuing to collect recycling and household waste at the same frequency. You will see other councils are going to things such as free week collections. That is not something that we have as a proposal. In terms of car parking, and again, yes, we are very aware of the interactions between a thriving community centre and town centre and the availability of that. And whilst we are making use of our active travel plans and project funding available through Welsh Government to put those in place, we have in place a parking review that is scheduled for this year, which will take into account the needs of the communities, as well as how we operate and charge for car parks. And it will be that review that clearly works with how that goes with the usage of those car parks. I'm going to ask Martin and Nikki to answer the piece on education, because I feel I'm be somewhat overstepping my mark and going into the education and children and white young people portfolio to go into that extensively.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Edwards, you raised a couple of specific points about Chepstow Comp in particular. Let me reassure you that there is no intention that facilities or the quality of provision at Chepstow Comprehensive will in any way suffer while it quietly sits and waits its turn, as you quite accurately put it, I think. The council has already, over the last 12 months, spent a large amount of money on updating facilities, some of which are quite fantastic. The new solar panels in the car park, which mean you can park your car in the shelter, but also generating power for the school. It's right at the forefront of modern technology there. I know the school, talking to the school's head teacher and also the school's finance officer, are both really delighted at the investment that the authority has made in that school that will in no way impinge on Chepstow taking its place as the fourth school that will have a lot of money put into it. I think we are currently at an early stage of negotiation with the school about what that new provision might look like. But I have assured you, and I continue to assure you, that our intention is that Chepstow, once the 3 to 19 school is completed, will very firmly be in our sights. There is also, of course, using that same scheme, I brought it to County Council last week, the new Welsh medium provision in Monmouth, and that's funded out of the same Welsh Government County Council joint funding arrangements. So even though we're in difficult times, we do not forget the needs of our children and young people, and that's why, in fact, the Council is proposing that we increase the school's budget at a rate which has not been seen for some time.
Thank you.
I'm aware, Rachel, that you are next, but I just wanted to make sure if anybody has any questions for Councillor Birch, because she may be having to leave shortly, on housing, homeless and community issues. Would that be all right? Okay, Rachel, if no one's got a question, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I've got several questions. The increase in adult social care budget by projected by £1 million. However, there are proposed savings of £2 million. Now, how is this going to be achieved whilst ensuring a decent level of support? It seems, that's a very important thing that we need to consider. Children's services, there's a savings projected of 1.4 million. How are you going to review service delivery, and how is this going to be achieved? Allied to that, there is obviously a chronic shortage of foster carers. Would it be sensible to review what financial and support benefits to foster carers are in place? Why is there a lack of foster carers? It seems to be a vital need to attract people in different circumstances, those with full-time jobs, better linked help. The support seems to be daytime generally, and perhaps it just isn't, it isn't usable for people who would very much like to become foster parents. And it would also alleviate the very high cost of residential care. And also attached to that, there seems to be a sort of, from what we're being told, that there's a high rising cases of children to be looked after. And, is it, what is the policy for keeping more families together to give more support within the family? Surely that's more cost effective as well as being better for the child and the family, if at all possible. The learning disability and mental health teams, what happens now and how will this change? And the learning disabilities remodelling of this there's a proposed saving of £300,000, which is a great deal. How do you want to achieve this, and does this include the closure of Tudor Street? I'll leave it there for the moment.
Jane, would you like to answer those questions?
Thank you. So if I start with the adult services question first, yeah, indeed, it's extremely challenging, the task that's before us, and I understand that people are concerned about how we're going to preserve the quality of service and ensure that people's needs are met. So, I think my answer to that is, partly that this is an opportunity for us to really regroup in light of the challenges, but also because we're coming out of, what's been a slightly different context for us within adult services over the pandemic period, where our priorities shifted slightly around, basically preservation of life. But now, it's really realigning ourselves back to those basic principles of prevention, early intervention, trying to work, from that strengths-based approach, so that we're looking at how people's needs are met within community and through their own individual and family resilience. And also aligning strongly with our partners to make sure that every resource that is ours collectively across health, third sector and social care is turned to the same endeavour, and we're not pulling in different directions at all, but we're really looking at that preventative piece. And if we can really focus our resources around enabling people, re-enablement of people, then it should reduce the amount of packages of care that we have to provide, and actually get better outcomes for people over longer term. And these aren't easy things, and obviously it takes up a lot of our sort of thought and creativity and innovation to keep at this. So things like building on things that have been successful for us, so community night support services, extending into more digital technology and assistive technology to support people living more independently, making sure that we're really trying to practice in a way that gives people very early on in their journey of maybe needing to use services, real sense of connection to place, sense of purpose, reducing loneliness and isolation, because we know that in the longer term this will alleviate pressure on services. When it comes to any staff efficiencies, we're always going to be looking at first at how can we do things differently rather than reduction of any frontline service. So it's going to be how we do things differently, both in terms of processes, but also in terms of, practice and like I said, digital assistive technology that might help us. The other the other side of that is that if we're thinking about, we've got a certain amount of money that we spend on services, how do we absolutely try to maximise every penny to the best use to get the best outcomes for people? And sometimes that's trying to work, again, innovatively to really expand the best value for money services. So, for example, direct payments, micro carers, what helps us get really good value for money out of every penny that we spend on care. So it's those both sides really driving our innovation, driving our evidence base, building what we know works, working with partners, but working with people at the heart of that as well. And then the value for money side of it in terms of what we commission and buy and spend on care, making sure that we get every penny that we can out of that. And I think through this, we're not going to be compromising on safeguarding. We are going to continue to meet people's needs, and that's by looking at individual cases on a case-by-case basis. This isn't quick, it takes time, but doing that in a sustainable way so that what we learn from that is built into, trying to build sustainable services into the future. So there's going to be bigger things going on, like as I've described, and also that case by case, as people come into the service, as we review, making sure that we're getting those assessments really correct, using all the mechanisms that we've got under the Social Services and Wellbeing Act to look at how we build individual and community resilience.
Could I just ask to clarification on one or 2 points there? When you say strength-based family-based approach and using families, are we not just increasing the burden on unpaid carers there? That sort of translates that way to me. And are we, as a local authority, helping to recruit personal assistants, PAs, for people who might need them?
Yes, I think you're right to raise the question of unpaid carers, and that's one of our strategic aims really, is to try and make sure that maximum support is given to unpaid carers, and it's undeniable that our unpaid carers, are such an important part of providing care to those who need it, and it's incumbent on us to really understand their needs and where we can to support them in the best way that we can. We undertake carers assessments where these are requested, alongside of assessments in for people, for the person who's being cared for, and we try to see it in a holistic way. You can't sometimes separate the cared for from the person who's caring, so our approach is always to look at each individual situation to try and take it in the round, and where we can to really support the whole family. Sometimes that can mean drawing in support from elsewhere. Sometimes it can be a much more shared approach to care. But yeah, unpaid carers are right at the heart of the work that we'll be trying to do. And the second question was around increasing maybe our use of PAs. And again, I'll turn to our micro carers innovation, which is very much linked to expand opportunities for people to use direct payments and use micro carers in that way.
Thank you.
So the questions that you raised around children's services, I think the first one was how are we going to redesign and look differently at our services, and I think that very much in our minds at the moment is our redesign work within children's services is falling very much into the placement area of our work. It links up with needing to move into a not-for-profit service delivery model. So we're looking at all our children who are currently in a range of different places, looking to see how we can safely transition them into different placements over the long term, looking to build our in-house capacity either through contracting with not-for-profit providers or through joined-up arrangements with both health and our other local authority regional partners. So there's a lot of work going on in the background around that, working closely with housing, looking at each child individually, thinking about how can we really support that child, young person, to link back into Monmouthshire, get into the best quality provision that we can provide for that young person. And again, it comes down to thinking about value for money. Are we getting the best value for money to get the best outcomes for children, so spending the money in the right way? I think the points that you made around foster care provision are absolutely at the heart of that. We would like to see over the next 1, 2, 3 years, the majority of our children who are looked after being placed with really well-supported, high-quality, in-house Monmouthshire carers. This is an ongoing endeavour. As you know, it's a national issue, not having sufficient foster carers, but Monmouthshire are, right at the forefront of trying to recruit, retain, look for all kinds of ways that we can draw people into fostering. It's an ongoing endeavour for us. We've relaunched our fostering strategy. You'll find the team often in sort of high-profile places throughout Monmouthshire over time, sort of doing the fronting it. But there's a huge media campaign in the background. We're linked into Foster Wales in terms of that that wider national platform, but really sort of focus in our local campaigns as well. We were really blessed this year with the John Lewis ad, and that's actually brought in a lot of inquiries into Monmouthshire. So it's a constant endeavour, but it's not a quick win, and we do. You know, we've been at this a few years now, and as you can see that from the data, the gains are slow, but it is an upward line in terms of how many in-house carers we use. So yes, that's our goal, is to make savings through increasing and expanding our placement opportunities for children and young people. The other side of that, which you also raised, was what are we doing to prevent children and young people from needing care in the first place. That's the other side of the equation for us, and you'll see over the last 5 years within Monmouthshire, there's been a much more a steadying off of children needing to come into care. I should say over the last 3 years, beg your pardon, there's been a steadying off of that numbers of children coming into care within Monmouthshire, and that's been, you know, we'd like to say that that's a result of the huge investment that we've had in the past of the implementation around the early help and preventative offer for families within Monmouthshire. Has really helped to stabilise that figure. So we have a whole suite of family support services that work into that early intervention and de-escalation. So even when children are, really with some quite significant complexities and vulnerabilities around their family environment, we've got services that go in and work alongside with that family for up to 18 months to really try to turn that round. So our preventative work that we do is full. There's lots of different options. We work right at the early edge, right through to sort of what is fairly highly complex family situations, so that any opportunity we have, we do that turnaround. And like I say, the figures have stabilised over the last 3 years. That's not to say, again, huge amount of challenges coming over the hill. We know, cost of living crisis, children and young people feeling sort of the levels of anxiety that they have coming out of the pandemic. There's lots of challenges ahead, but we feel confident that we've got a good suite of family support services to deal with that, and we're extending again. So our next service development around that is through doing a specific team looking at rehabilitation and working with higher risk, and that's one of the mandates in there. It's sort of developing the facility, the team, where we've got sort of reliance again on more private providers to work with, where we're having to do sort of not just change work with a family, but basic supervision into a family home, that we're looking to set up an in-house service to deal with that. A, because it will be a better cost-effective model for us, but B, because it will get better outcomes. It'll be directly linked into the rest of our preventative work.
Could I just ask one question? Are you happy with that, Councillor? The one question that I wanted to ask was the 18 months intervention that you're talking about is for identified families, isn't it, who have been identified as having sort of parenting deficits. Would it not be more preventative if there was a more generic service, maybe antenatally, to teach people how to parent before they actually get into that situation? Would that not be more cost effective? As family centres, that type of thing that we used to have. Thank you.
Thanks, and that's slightly outside of our brief within social care, so that would be sort of Families First, Flying Start, those sorts of services, looking at those general populations of parenting skills, antenatal work. But I would say that as I have been talking about our intense Achieving Change Together team, which is a longer term, quite intensive family change service for families who are at that sort of higher end, very much on the cusp. We also have the sort of the services in place that are working with families where vulnerabilities are first being identified. So we've got aspect wellbeing panels that look to sort of deal with it's basically early intervention and prevention, but much lower down that sort of tier of need. So we've got building stronger families, working very much with family goals, and to speak more into this type of space I think that you were referring to. So it is, like I say, it's a suite of family support and early intervention that goes right across the sort of tiers of need.
Thank you.
So the final question was around learning disability and mental health services. I think there's a mandate there, yes, for the 300,000 that you identified. There's only a small portion of that we set against sort of staffing and efficiency changes, and we're looking to protect frontline there and to actually look at the management and business support structure of the two teams to look for the savings from that, and the other savings will come from making sure that we're pursuing where it's required all of our continuing healthcare cases, and some sort of just going through that sort of assessment process to make sure that packages of care are the right ones for people. And no was the answer to the very last question. It doesn't.
Thank you very much, Jane.
Councillor Powell, would you like to ask the next question?
Thank you very much, Chairman. I've got two questions. I'll do quick with them. The one thing is, you're reducing the funds towards Gwent Music. Was this discussed with Gwent Music when it was going to be reduced, and by how much? Because they do help themselves quite a lot. I am a member of the Gwent Music Support. I pay so much a quarter, and a lot of others have done that. They did that when the other authorities dropped out. They started to do that so that people were helping to support them. But I don't know how far down our contribution to them will be to the stage where they'd have to give up. So I don't know. That was one question. Was it discussed with them? My other question is to do with our shortage of houses, low cost particularly. Is there any way we can encourage the developers to get on and fulfil the planning permissions they've already been given? Because we've given planning permissions for various places where there's been a certain percentage, quite a good percentage of low-cost housing, but the builders don't get on and do it. And because of that, we've got the shortage of low-cost housing gets worse. And I don't know what we can do about it. All we can do is give the planning permission, and it's in their hands. I mean, they probably playing with the cost of things, but I don't know if there's anything we can do. Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Yeah, would you like to answer that? Sorry. Sorry, yes, Councillor Grocott.
Thank you, Chair. Personally, it was with a very heavy heart that we wrote in savings of £100,000 to the music service. The reality, of course, is that we were the last authority to support it in the way that we've been able to. And in this whole budget process this year, it's been a matter of weighing up possibilities. What we have done is to keep a hardship fund so that in any school, those children who want to learn to play an instrument, whose parents can't afford it, will still be supported through a budget that we will continue to give to the music service. But specifically, you asked about discussions with the head of the service. I can reassure you, Councillor Powell, that Will McLean, the senior officer for children and young people, has met the head of the music service. It probably wasn't the happiest discussion that Will McLean has ever had, but it was an understanding that we found from the head of the service.
I'm glad about that. I'm glad about that because it is very important. Children that are involved in music and likewise children involved in sports tend to have such an interest that they're less likely to get into trouble when they get older because they've got their interest either in one or the other. And I think interest in music is wonderful because they go on from there. And I'm very thankful for that.
Just briefly, I couldn't agree with you more. And if questions start to get too difficult for me, I will resort to singing highlights of Gilbert and Sullivan to entertain you.
Yeah, the other question.
Councillor Powell, would it be all right if we go back to your affordable housing question when...
Yeah, yes, please.
Okay, I understand that Francis O'Brien will be able to answer it, so we'll go to it now. Thank you.
Good morning. With regards to the question about affordable housing, we try to do everything we can to encourage developers to bring forward the sites that they've received planning permission for, but obviously that can often be a challenge in terms of our ability to enforce them to bring forward something that they have secure planning permission for. Going forward with the new LDP, and as that develops, obviously we want to encourage more affordable housing as that progresses into the next phases, and that is a priority area for us. But yeah, it is a difficult area for us to be able to encourage developers that have secure planning permission to bring forward those sites, and there will be factors that they will be considering as they bring those things forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And David Jones, if we could go to you next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Garrick, for your presentation this morning. Can I just check, first of all, before I come to a question, the borrowing cost, the pie chart that you have in your presentation, borrowing costs of 7.1 million. Can I just check that's not the cost as in the interest rate? It does include repayments as well, does it?
It does, I believe. Peter, Jonathan, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. It includes repayment of our borrowing and interest costs. So it covers the full cost of our meeting our capital expenditure obligations that are financed through borrowing. Okay, thank you. That's reassuring.
Moving on then to the children and education part, the proposal of a 5% net increase in school budget next year, but a 2.8% efficiency saving needed to close the resource gap and schools to tap into reserves. Now, there are schools with very small reserves, and are they in any particular danger from that? And could you give us some sort of example of where the efficiency savings might come, so that we fully understand what is meant by that, please? Do you want me to ask the next question first, or?
You take your questions. I'll write them down.
Okay, right.
Go in
and in the children's services section, 1.4 million resource gap met through proposed savings of 1.4 million, reviewed service delivery and implementing a more cost-effective service. Now, for the past 8 to 10 years, I've been sat in Children and Young People and other people Scrutiny Committee, and there have been mechanisms to save money. How many more cost-effective things can we put into operation that will still save money and move us forward in producing a good service as well, really? Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I was stuck. I accidentally put my presentation into presentation mode and couldn't get back to the meeting there. So I think on the children's services piece, Jane, is that you that would be best placed to answer?
Yes, it would.
Thank you.
Pick that up first and then we'll go back to the other.
Pick that up first.
Yeah, pick it up.
Okay.
So,
okay. Yeah. So just picking up, the question about children's services. Yeah. I mean, the most cost-effective way of saving money within children's services is to not have children needing to be looked after. And you know, I think that what I said previously still stands to that, really. You know, for children not to need looking after, you need really good preventative services at every stage, from when general population, not us, but it's still needed, it's the council generally, not social care. You know, then you need to be able to respond when families first get identified vulnerabilities, and you need services in place there right at that complex end. So really good preventative services, and I say, you know, we have seen a levelling off of needs. You sometimes don't know what's out there, you know, what's out there. So sometimes you do get, you know, families come through and it's all of a sudden they're in crisis. But for the majority of families, you can get in there early. Cost effectiveness, again, it comes back to when children do need to be looked after, the only safe option is for them to come into care. It's then trying to get the most cost effective way whilst not compromising in any way on outcomes. And actually sometimes the most cost-effective way is the way of getting the best outcomes for children, and that's to be able to place children in Monmouthshire with Monmouthshire carers. So it comes back at every stage to us really being able to attract those carers. And I think actually one of the questions raised previously was, are you reviewing the support and the financial and other support offer that we make to foster carers? And yes, we're doing that both on a regional and a national level to really, we've got a great support offer. You know, there's always room to improve the financial offer that we make to foster carers, but we're doing that in conjunction at a national level with other local authorities for that review. Otherwise, you're just ending up in competition with each other. And in terms of cost effectiveness around more complex placements, so residential and other placements, even individual solo placements, as I said before, we're looking to try and see change the way that we sort of commission that care to being at the mercy is probably not the right word, but being at the sort of the wrong end of the supply-demand market, with having to rely on what is an extremely expensive private care market for children, which doesn't always get the best outcomes for young people. To really change that, turn it around, try and make sure that our mainstay of provision is either in-house or in partnership with not-for-profit or with our regional partners. And I mean, and I know that this is a journey that we've been on, you know, over years, but you know, we're getting to the sharp end of those places now.
What I was really getting at was, how can we be more cost effective this year when we were cost effective last year, really? And I understand what you're saying, but it's difficult to see how one can become more cost effective year on year. But anyway, thank you.
Councillor Grocott, do you want to add something?
Councillor Jones, you did mention the 5% increase in schools' budgets that are part of these proposals. Excuse me. So perhaps I could comment about some of the specific education points that you raised there. You're quite right. 5% increase. Currently, we have one school that is in deficit. That's projected to rise to 7. And you asked quite reasonably if it would be possible to give some schools more than others to try to get over that problem for those schools that will suffer most. Unfortunately, schools' funding is organised on a formula basis. And so the local authority has its scheme of delegation, and it has to apply without fear or favour. What we do, and have done for many years to be fair, is to provide regular support for head teachers and chairs of governors with a dedicated finance officer. And I can remember from my time as a chair of governors coming in with my head teacher to go through the budget in great detail, which was fantastic in helping us to keep on track. So it will be, it will be difficult for a few more schools. It's probably fortunate that this year most of our schools do have some reserves. They no doubt would have been looking to the future to invest in various schemes, and the reality is that that's one area where they will need to look to their own use of resources now. And that brings me on to the point you raised about the use of resources and efficiency savings. I would make 2 points, I think. The first is that the county council cannot tell governing bodies how it's going to use its money. It is delegated to the schools, and then in law, while we have certain checks and safeguards to make sure that they don't allow the head of the governing body to go off on a Caribbean holiday, nonetheless, in law, the money is handed over to the schools to use for their own education provision. We do keep a small amount centrally, but when you look at that now, you would struggle to find money that is kept in the central budget that does not cover statutory services. So the 2 big things that are covered is school transport, which we have a legal duty to provide, and provision for additional learning needs, which again, we have a statutory duty to provide additional funding to schools where a pupil has been identified. So the term efficiency saving is perhaps a bit of a misnomer here. I think that where we have looked to make savings, it will enable us to minimise the amount of reductions to individual schools' budgets, while at the same time enabling all services to be maintained. Let me give you one quite painful example, which is the reduction in the manpower in the education psychology service. There's currently 0.6 of a vacancy, and we had hoped to put in the 0.4 so that that person could be appointed. That is an area that we have identified as a possibility for savings. It's been projected as a cut to the education psychology service. It's more a cut to their budget because the person is not currently in post. So, in a sense, you know, it's an efficiency saving in that that allows us to put more money into schools to meet that. We're also looking to increase the amount of technology that we use, so the administration of the additional learning needs service, for example, where there is a projected reduction in hours. Hopefully, the use of technology can, at least in part, cover for that. I put hand on heart and say, you know, I didn't come in to local government and to take on this education role to be making savings. You have heard from the cabinet member for finance that hopefully this is a 1-year hit. It's not going to suddenly transform, but I think the finance officer would agree with me that we've never seen anything quite like this in the history of Monmouthshire. And I hope we never see it again, because it's been agonising. But we have, and I would come back to this, we have increased the budget to schools by 5%. There is very little more that we could do to make savings in the administration at County Hall.
Thank you. Chair, can I just ask one more question? Sorry.
Can you make it brief?
You've mentioned the educational psychology or school psychology service. What does rigorous grant funding strategy mean, please? In the presentation that Councillor Garrick gave us this morning, and this was intended to offset reduced staffing levels. Is that something you've just mentioned? But I don't really see where the grant is coming from to offset reduced staffing levels.
Do you know which line in the budget it is, Councillor Jones?
I'm just referring to Councillor Garrick's presentation this morning.
I think I know a man who might know whereabout in the budget that is.
Right.
I will defer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Grocott. And just to clarify on that point, and I think just to extend beyond the input there. So, as is always the case, we engage very constructively and positively with Welsh Government in terms of specific grant funding streams, either those that are announced ahead of the financial year or those that come forward as is Welsh Government's prerogative during the year, and certainly in those areas that Martin's just talked to, as is the case right across, we're going to be looking to explore ways to be able to manoeuvre specific grant funding to try and mitigate the impacts, not just of to the psychology service there otherwise, but actually elsewhere, and I think that's that point in terms of the continual attention that we give to try and ensure that specific grant funding can actually continue to mitigate the effects that we're obviously facing as a result of the budget.
So we are expecting some more grant money to come along, are we?
It's a natural consequence. It's a natural consequence of what? Grant notifications that we've either had generally at this point of the year. We've received the provisional settlement. Welsh Government will allocate all Wales sums of grant funding, and those will evolve as we move towards the final settlement and actually beyond it. And even after we've set the budget, we won't get a very specific understanding of the distribution that we might get on certain grant funding streams. But when those grant funding streams become clear and known to us, we will better understand the terms and conditions attached to them. And again, to my point, we look to understand as to how that money can be worked really positively to further the interests of the council, but also to mitigate the impacts that we're having to deal with through the budget.
What if the grants aren't forthcoming? Is there a
the grant allocations are already committed to by Welsh Government as part of the settlement pack? But again, Welsh Government will reserve money back and will, as is often seen, issue further grant awards, and that's on the basis that certain programmes of work that Welsh Government have in train may not move forward as quickly as they originally intended, and clearly they want to make sure that public funds are sensibly committed, so that they will restructure that funding, and that might then result in further specific grant funding awards in other areas as we move through the year.
Councillor Strong.
Okay, I've got several points I want to make, some of which have already been covered, but I just want to get some clarity if possible. I'd like to start by acknowledging the context of this proposed budget, unprecedented times and difficult choices that need to be made, and the statement that the budget intends putting people first and the people of Monmouthshire first. And also, I feel it's really important that we've given a commitment to MCC as a living wage employer. However, that said, I've got some questions that I would like to ask. Jane, I was really interested in your replies to previous councillors, and I am so glad that you mentioned continuing healthcare, because that is a biggie for me. I mean, I've been in sort of wrangles with health staff over individual sort of care packages where we thought it was continued healthcare. There was a wrangle, and I think it's about giving your staff the tools to be able to challenge decisions and actually do stick to person-centred planning, and actually keeping that person, whether it's an adult or a child, at the centre of that assessment. And so, yeah, I was really welcomed to hear that. You mentioned, and it's my sort of passion as well, the Social Wellbeing and Social Services and Wellbeing Act, and that underpinned all that we did within social services when I was employed by MCC. I want to just raise a bit about the education psychology service. I'm still not clear, because it does say, you know, categorically that, you know, grants will be pursued, rigorous grants will, just for that bit. But also I want to just raise the issue of CENCOM and our commitment as a council to those children and young people with sensory impairments. A lot of people won't realise, but I spent 20 years working with adults and children that were profoundly deaf sign language users. So I know that good educational psychology and input at an early age actually produces good outcomes in adulthood. And it does say as part of that bit in the budget that it wasn't just about the educational support, psychology service, it was the support service alongside it. So I just want to clarify that we've still got a commitment to those children and young people. I've got another couple of things as well.
Councillor Strong, can you ask a question?
Yeah, so I want to find out if there's a commitment to carry on that service, basically, and that isn't going to be cut as part of this budget. Because the other part of it is the budget information that we've had is quite broad brushing. It isn't specifics, so it's been very difficult to unpick what things mean. And as a scrutiny committee, I think that's really important.
Sorry, what have you been presented with? I presumed you got the entire budget papers.
No, we've got 17 pages.
You haven't got the appendix?
No, no. So
I was not aware that had not been provided to the committee. I can only apologise.
No, so that's part of the pre-meeting.
Could we just a bit of an explanation for that, if you could bear with us, thank you.
The agenda front page does link to the 17-page cover report, but it also refers to further paperwork that was provided as part of the Cabinet meeting last week. Also within the cover report, it does reference the appendices, but I do take the point that for newer members it perhaps could have been clearer, and in future we will list all of the appendices individually on the front page with their links to help. I hope that clarifies, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel.
Okay. Can I go on to my next point? Okay. I was really pleased to see that prevention and forms part of the budget, and also a more sort of robust FORS service. I know from previous colleagues that some teams, some of those workers, the numbers of specialist people working in rehab and specifically with people around FORS has decreased, the numbers of staff, and so we need to make sure that is addressed really. And I want to find out the numbers and what the new service might look like, because I think that's really important. Okay, and I also wanted to ask another question about what the remodelling of the learning disability and mental health service might look like. £300,000 just in sort of remodelling the management seems quite a big hit really, but it's more than that. So I think, in my previous thing about we need more detail, and I'd like maybe the committee to actually be, to actually have some more detail over what that might look like. And I think that's all I need to say really. Thank you.
Councillor Grocott, would you like to answer some of that and possibly bring in Nicola Wellington when you've...
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll make a brief comment on your question on the education psychology service. Then I'll hand over to my colleague Nikki Wellington to talk about CENCOM, because there have been, I think, wider discussions, and she will know exactly where we are now. In terms of the education psychology service, when we first started trying to formulate where savings might be made, it was a really unpleasant day. And we felt that wherever possible, services should be kept within schools so that they're there on a day-to-day basis for children to use. And so a range of services were looked at and balanced against, let's say, an education psychologist. And it was felt that we couldn't cut both. because that really would be unforgivable in terms of delivery of service. So what we decided was that we could defer the appointment of that missing head psych, while at the same time continue to support schemes that the Education Service has been promoting, but which are delivered on a day-to-day basis in schools, and which are making a tremendous difference. Things like every primary school now having a skilled higher level teaching assistant providing support with emotional behaviour and emotional intelligence on a day-to-day basis. That is having a tremendous impact on helping children to behave, to learn, and to understand how their behaviour is formed, and through that being able to deal with it better. So the reassurance I can give you is that we thought very carefully about where the day-to-day benefit would be best felt. And the sad outcome of that was that we have had to defer the reappointment of that one education psychology post. But Nikki, would you like to say something about where we are with CENCOM now?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so in terms of CENCOM, there are no planned reductions to our contribution to CENCOM. We will continue to work with all our partners of CENCOM to ensure that any efficiencies can be made within the service are made, but that will be across all partners. So there are no planned cuts in Monmouthshire to CENCOM.
Are you happy with those answers, Councillor Strong? Thank you. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Rachel, for the presentation. Councillor Grucott mentioned about the Gwent music and that there was the hardship fund. I was just wondering how much is within that hardship fund? What's the criteria for pupils to access that? And how many pupils you think will use that? How many sort of will be impacted? And then my other question was regarding Mon Life with the exercise referral schemes, just because obviously you're proposing to cut the hours at leisure centres. Just wanted to check that there wasn't any cuts to the actual exercise referral schemes. Thank you.
Peter, do you want a volunteer for that one?
I think in terms of the specifics of Gwent music, and if Councillor Grocott's happy for me to defer this through, but yeah, I'll pass it over to Nikki just to provide some brief comment, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. So the hardship fund is £9,000, which we have had in place for a number of years with Gwent Music. Gwent Music operate that scheme for us, work with our schools closely to identify those families that are low income. It is not only available to children on free school meals, entitled to free school meals. We wanted to widen it so that it was including low income families. So there is an application process that parents make through the school to Gwent Music to access that fund. And it's reviewed every year to check that we have enough funds within there to support those families.
Councillor Fuchs, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think.
Thank you.
The only comment I can, I'm Councillor Fuchs, Cabinet Member for Equalities. I think the only thing to add to that is, yes, we must keep an eye on the Gwent Music hardship fund and make sure it is accessible and monitor that and see how many children successfully apply that have applied. And obviously we would prefer, as I heard Councillor Grocott earlier and Councillor Garrick both say, that obviously we would prefer not to be having to make any of these savings, but the unprecedented economic situation means we are having to look at all these areas.
Are you happy with that, Councillor McKenna?
How many children do you think will actually access that hardship fund? Have you got any predictions?
I can get that.
Have to be the officer, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I can get that information from Gwent Music. They do provide it, but I haven't got the current numbers, but I can get that for you and provide it to the committee.
Thank you, Nikki. If we could just get that to Councillor McKenna, that'd be great. I'd be grateful for that. Councillor Buckler?
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry.
I had the question as well about exercise referral.
Yeah, if the chair's happy for me to come in. Sorry, I was just clarifying because I know Councillor Birch isn't now on the call, but I've just checked with colleagues, and just to confirm, there are no reductions to the exercise referral scheme proposed for next year.
Councillor Buckler.
Thank you, Chair. Two points. Why are the income shortfalls £800,000? And what can be done to address this? There's one sort of caveat I'd say in this is I'd consider that upping parking charges is a problem. We are a rural county, and it is not practical to imagine that everyone will be able to get on their bike and do most of their shopping, travelling to our towns and villages and daily commutes. And the second thing I want to ask, homelessness apparently is to be dealt with by bringing it up to the standard in modern Wales. What does that mean? Thank you.
Do we have a volunteer? I don't think Sarah Birch is with us.
On homelessness, I was referring to the legislation that Welsh Government felt that it needed to put in place because councils were not providing a base level of support for homelessness that they felt was needed for us, and we are modern Wales. In terms of those shortfalls and savings, a lot of that's driven by some very unrealistic expectations that were placed by the previous administration on things such as traffic enforcement. There was quite a high-profile report in the South Wales Argus, I think, end of last year, which put us at an over £200,000 deficit on that, and also some unrealistic assumptions on the uptake on Modern Life membership post-pandemic again. So we're dealing with the reality and the data of what we've gathered over the last year. I'm going to pass over to Peter at this point, if that's okay, to elaborate a bit further on those income shortfalls.
Thank you, Councillor Garrick. Yeah, I'm probably not going to expand a whole lot more in the sense that I think the papers themselves talk to the specifics of the detail, but I think just to sort of just take your point just a step further, we've continually reset our budgets year on year, and if we work on that basis, certainly going up into the pandemic. So certainly in terms of income budgets and where we continue to assess levels of footfall and demand, price sensitivity, and our ability to be able to generate income, and where those, for whatever reason, market circumstances or otherwise, we've had to adjust them back, then we've done that and we've accommodated the pressure that's resulted. Clearly, the pandemic has introduced a whole set of further issues, I guess, that have exacerbated in the sense of, for example, with our leisure centres, which is a specific and notable one, where footfall has not returned back to pre-pandemic levels. But clearly we continue to market really strongly, and we hope that's going to rebound. But I think we're still running at about 80 to 90% of pre-pandemic footfall. It would be inappropriate, I think, in terms of setting a budget, not to redress that and to just acknowledge and accept the budget pressure that we need to accommodate. Clearly, if evidence suggests that people shown to return, and footfall continues to return to pre-pandemic levels through next financial year, then clearly for the following financial year we would look to introduce further income budgets into the budget proposals. But clearly, we've got to take an appropriate and proper assessment of risk in terms of what we're likely to achieve. Otherwise, you're just going to simply walk yourself into next year and be faced with in-year budget pressures to manage. And clearly, as Jane's talked to earlier, we have risks that sit in and around the budget within social care and elsewhere. Clearly, we need to mitigate that as much as possible. It's one of those reasons as to why we've obviously brought forward these pressures around income shortfalls and made sure that they're included within the budget.
I'd like to ask a few questions, if that's okay. We have, this is probably for you, Councillor Garrick, we have, you've mentioned children with additional learning needs are up by 0.6 million due to increase in numbers, but you also mentioned complexity, and I wondered if we have any reasoning around that. What I'm concerned about is we have a forecast that there is a decrease in adult need. So I'm guessing we have a bit of a delay in the middle there. But if we have an increase and we don't know why it is, or would that be because of previous assessment? And is there then a risk of litigation from those who perhaps didn't get an assessment prior? Also, I wanted to know where we are with the current issue we have with adult services and a review, where we are with the MENCAP contract, which I believe needs to be reviewed in time for April. Whereas, as Councillor Buckler mentioned earlier, we have a talk of a 2 million decrease savings and a 1 million increase, and I'm just wondering where we are with that. I'm told they previously had a 3-year contract, but usually now, since the initial one have it annually, they've had to reduce their service users from 60 to 40, but know that that's caused ex-service users considerable distress, anxiety and exclusion. And I'm just wondering where that features in the budget when we haven't had the review outcome yet.
Thanks, Chair. So in terms of MENCAP, while we haven't had the review, we do need to await the review for a new contract. It's our intention to extend the current contract by 1 year to allow that to conclude.
Could I just ask then, are we looking, because MENCAP haven't been contacted yet over the review, are we just looking at the paper contract, or are we asking for some assessment of what they're actually providing?
I'm going to pop that over to Peter or possibly Jane. I think they're conferring over who's best set to answer this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Garrick. I'll just come in briefly. So just to highlight here, the 3-year contract with MENCAP has come to the end of its contract term. Clearly, there's no intention to step away from that, and the contract will be extended, within the throes of what the extension, our ability to extend it in the contract term, the current contract term. But I think there is a desire just to review the contract. It's not to review in any way. I think. There's certainly no intention, and MENCAP are the only provider in the south of the county. Clearly, as is the case, as I'm sure everybody in the committee can understand, when the 3-year term of a contract comes to an end, naturally you're going to look to want to reassess and make sure that the contract is based on the needs that it's looking to address. So that is the review that Councillor Garrick's talking to. I'd expect an extension of the contract of at least a year, and then for that contractor review to be undertaken in parallel before the new contract is then subsequently put in place. Thank you.
I've just got one more. Councillor Sandals and I were at the EAS meeting earlier this week, and I note in the the budget that we are looking to reduce our contribution by 10%. I'm aware that Caerphilly have already notified of EAS of a reduction of 10%, but there doesn't appear to be any expectation that anybody other than Caerphilly is reducing, but we clearly are. So I'm just wondering what impact that will have on services. Thank you.
I do believe that Caerphilly and ourselves are not alone on that one. I do believe there's at least one other authority that is looking to it. I think it's Newport. I think I'm going to need to pop over to Martin to go into the depths of what the impact is of that.
Yes, every one of the 5 authorities that make up the Education Achievement Service area will unfortunately be making reductions in the service. Those discussions are taking place at the moment, and different authorities are suggesting different amounts of reduction. It wouldn't be appropriate for me, therefore, to say what that final outcome will be. But each of the 5 authorities, the Cabinet Member for Education comes together to make up the Joint Executive Group. We did meet last week. We're working very closely with EAS, and they are developing a range of strategies as to how they would cope with reductions to their central budget at different amounts. But beyond that, there is very little I can say at the moment. But as a service, EAS has already made very considerable cuts. They do anticipate and are planning for further cuts this year.
Thank you, Councillor Grocott. Are there any more questions? Brief ones, hopefully. No. Oh.
May I ask a question to Councillor Grocott, please?
You can.
With the pressures that we've already heard this morning about that are on schools, and one of the major assets of our schools are the teachers, could you give us an indication of what morale is like within schools with the pressure that they're under and their possibly striking action coming up and so on? What is morale like in our schools, please?
It would be difficult for me to put words into individual teachers' mouths, but I think you only have to walk into a school at the moment to see that teachers are frustrated, sometimes angry, and obviously I made a statement about industrial action at the County Council last Thursday. I don't want to add anything to that, other than to say that I hope that ministers and leaders of the teachers' unions can very quickly get together and resolve the dispute before it has any huge impact on the learning of young people, because at the end of the day, any further withdrawal of teaching facilities will have yet more impact on individual learners after 2 very difficult years that has undoubtedly had an impact on learning in our schools.
Councillor Buckler?
Thank you, Chair. Very quick one. It's mentioned that funding will be reduced to the Monmouthshire and Torvine Youth Offending Service, and how will this service change? Thank you.
I think that's one for Jane again, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you.
Yes, the mandate for the Youth Funding Service is, you're aware that the Youth Funding Service is a partnership arrangement with Torvine, and there are also other other organisations that form part of the partnership. So one of the main expenditures in the Monmouthshire Youth Offending Service at the moment is the cost of the accommodation. So we'll be looking to see how we might be able to find a more cost-effective way of accommodating the service. It's in a private estate at the moment. So we might be able to look for new accommodation that would be considerable cost saving, and there will be some restructuring of the workforce, but that would be mitigated by just a sort of a realignment of duties. So it'd still be the preventions would still be in there, the statutory service would still be in there, but the majority of the savings will be through the realignment of duties, some of the sort of restructuring around how processes and systems are done, so some business support functions may need to reduce, and then so that's it in a nutshell. Yeah.
Have you got your hand up again, Councillor Buckler, or are you? Sorry, I'm just right. Thank you. Okay. Well, I think we've conducted thorough scrutiny this morning, and I'd like to thank Cabinet and officers for their contributions. We're not going to discuss we're not going to draw full conclusions today, as consideration of the budget is a matter for full council. But I'd like to thank everybody for coming here today, and unless there is anything else, I'll now close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for having us. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Right. Is Rachel running up the next Monday with the knitting issues?
Yeah, Jackie, because this was a special meeting, we're back to the normal routine.
Sure. Oh, sorry. Why didn't you tell me? Oops, sorry.